All right, guys. So we are going to continue with animation. Last class, we did keyframes for you just moving the camera around. Today, what we're going to do is moving multiple objects and controlling them with keyframes. So I don't have a camera set up in this one. You guys can just use your hammer files. You can delete the keyframes from the hammer or from the camera if you need. As a reminder, to delete the keyframe, say we have one set here. We're going to go over to that frame and we're just going to right click and we'll hit delete. And then that will get rid of that keyframe. So in my scene, you'll see I have a roughly created hammer. I didn't go through the entire tutorial like you guys did. And then down here, we have a nail. As what you can probably guess, we're going to do a little animation of the hammer tacking in a nail. So there's going to be multiple things going on. And I'll walk you through an example of how to do this. Then you guys will go ahead and do a version of your own. So just the general animation of what kind of movements are going to be happening. So the hammer is probably going to be pivoting. Every time it swings down, it's going to contact the head of the nail, and the nail will go a little deeper, and then the hammer will pull back in its rotation, and then it'll swing down again. So we're basically just going to be using the rotate tool and the move tool. So first things first, to get our hammer to rotate. Right now, if we go to rotate, and if we rotate this, it's going to pivot at the head. If any of you have ever swung a hammer before, that's not really how it works. Generally, you're holding it in your hand down at the end of the handle, and it's going to pivot based on where your hand is. So the first thing we're going to do is press D, and now this icon is going to change, and we are going to move our pivot point all the way down to the bottom of the handle. Now it's going to be helpful to change our view so we can actually make sure it is aligned with the bottom. And then when we go back in here, now that we have that set, we can press D again. And now we're still in the rotate tool. We can see when we rotate it, this is already starting to look a lot more natural. It's not perfect yet, but it's a good start. So let's position our hammer to where it would actually be striking the nail. So now every time we move or rotate, it's going to be based on that pivot point. And again, it's probably helpful to use the different perspective cameras so we can get a good idea of where we actually need to be. All right. Really all I'm doing at this point is just getting it lined up. That way it's pretty close for when I start adding in the keyframes. I won't have to worry about fiddling around with it too much. All right, so we'll say that that is good. As a little tip, anytime you're in this view, if you want to switch specifically to one of the perspectives, you just hover over that camera and you press spacebar, and it'll focus in on just that one. All right, so what we're going to do now is start adding in the keyframes. So if you remember, when we add a keyframe, the transform attributes will all turn red, letting us know that there is one. Let's actually set this back up to be a 10-second animation. Let's go to frame 1. Let's make sure everything, all right. So with our hammer selected, we are going to add our first keyframe. That is telling us this is where we want to start the animation. So the first thing we'll have to do is pull back the hammer. So let's say we pull it back to here. Let's say 25 frames in. We want to do that. I accidentally saved a frame. Let me just resave that. All right, there we go. Then another 25 frames later, say, we will rotate it back down. And so on. We'll do, say, at 75. And then say at 100 just for now so I can show the example. All right, so now if we were to play this, we'll go back to frame 1. We'll hit play. This is a very, very basic part of the animation. It doesn't look very fluid, but it's a starting point. So there's a bunch of things we still need to do here. One, every time the hammer comes down, the nail should move. Before we even get to that, though, right now this hammer is going up and down at the same rate. If you guys remember one of the principles we talked about, say timing, we could add a pause at the top to let us know that something's about to happen. And also the movement downward should be a lot faster than the movement upward. So what I'm going to do is a couple things. I'm going to delete the ones we just added, because we're going to be changing the timing a bit. All right, so if we're starting with the hammer down, we'll say it takes 20 frames. Let's make it 30 to pull the hammer back. So we'll rotate it up. We'll save a keyframe. And then we're going to only say maybe it takes 10 frames to come back down. And then that would be 30 to go back up and 10 to go back down. Right now I'm just placing these very roughly. When you guys do it, I'd like you to be a little more accurate than this. All right, so let's see what that looks like now. All right, so already we're beginning to see it's a little more realistic looking. It's still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was that first attempt. So the next thing we can do is, if you're going to be swinging this yourself, you're probably not working on a perfect pivot. Every time that you pull the hammer back, maybe you move it up a little. And then when it comes back down, it's going to hit the hammer or hit the nail. Then you pull it back up. Maybe your hand wobbles a little bit. It goes up. And it comes back down, and so on. Even if we already have a keyframe in position, if you hit S on a spot that's already a keyframe, it'll just save the new settings as your keyframe. All right, so now we have both the rotation and a little up-down movement to the hammer. The next thing, obviously if we're hitting a nail, ideally the nail should be going into the wood. So let's see, on frame 40 is the first one. All right, so now we're going to select our nail. Actually, the first thing we need to do is we need to set a keyframe at frame 1 for our nail so we know where it's starting. Then at 40, the hammer is going to come down for the first time. It's going to strike the nail, and it's going to move it down a little bit. So let's see what happens when this plays. All right, so right off the bat, you can see the nail, as soon as the animation started, just started sliding down. The way to prevent that is, so we're going to delete this. So right before right before the nail gets struck, nothing has actually happened to the nail yet. So we'll go to say frame 39. We'll save a keyframe. We want it to be in the exact same position until it gets struck. And now that it's gotten struck on frame 40, now it's going to move down. And then we'll hit S to save a keyframe. Our next one, let's see, at 70. At 80 is our next strike. So at 79, we'll save a keyframe. At 80, we'll move it down a little bit again. And we'll keep going. That didn't save one of my keyframes. All right, let's fix fix that. So if we go to 40, now we go to 80 there. There we go. All right, so now if we play this from this screen, let's say we don't select anything. Let's turn off that. All right, so you'll notice because the nail started lowering, each time we bring the hammer down, we're also going to have to now lower the hammer. That way it's striking in the correct spot. But so that is doing keyframes for separate objects. If we wanted to, as we're doing this, we could have the camera moving around. It's the same general principle. But you got to make sure you're doing all of your keyframes for the object that needs to be moving. So today, you're going to build upon the keyframing, just moving the camera. You're going to take your hammer. You're going to add a nail. The nail can just be, mine's just a cylinder. I added a couple edge loops at the top and scaled that out to make a head. And then I had a couple edge loops at the bottom and scaled those in to make the point. Add a plane for the floor. That way you can have something that the nail's actually going into. And what I want you to do is start with the nail completely out. Have it be 240 frames, so a 10-second animation. And you're going to, over those 10 seconds, hammer that nail into the plane. I'll be on mute as you have questions, and we'll work through this, and we'll go from there. All right, good luck.